Firstly, these anti-competitive practices of a number of these big tech companies, I mean, we know it has been quite an issue for some time. Why is this such a significant announcement?
Danica, historically, creating news cost a lot of money, took a lot of people and took a lot of resources. And that's what went into quality journalism, and it's what went into quality news. But over the last decade, as we've seen things shift online, we've seen what are effectively parasitic, curated sources of news, which would cherry pick news from existing online sources and so forth. And this was done effectively at no cost to them. Now, the problem is, as advertising shifted online and as, for example, traditional media struggled to gain advertising revenue, they had to put up paywalls, which meant that a lot of people would be driven to what they considered free. But in many cases, that free content was actually something that was pushed to the top by way of an algorithm. Now, traditionally, there was, conspiracy theories that, the media created the news. And, for example, Rupert Murdoch sat in his tower telling every journalist such as yourself exactly what to say and do. And even though that's probably not what happened, we now actually do have a situation similar to that where big tech companies can actually control what people are seeing. And more importantly, they can control what people are not seeing by pushing things right off the front page and preventing their access to it. So this actually has a very dangerous implication, even at a national security level, because it's very easy, if you control the media, to essentially control people's thoughts. And once upon a time, state-based media and media outlets in particular countries would have significant influence over their own population. But now they can actually extend that influential reach globally. And so one of the things that we're seeing now, for example, is that over the last few months, despite COVID-19, China has not been appearing in the news all that much. The news has been focused on internal struggles within America. Various states in Australia are all doing battle with each other instead of us all uniting as a nation against sources overseas that could be causing harm to us. And so it doesn't take a lot of thought to realise the impact on a global scale that control over the media and social media and what people are reading in their feed every day can actually have on people's thoughts.
Yeah, it's certainly a worrying for the average Australian, the average person. In terms of what are the differences between traditional media generators and technology-driven curated online content, can you take us through that?
Sure. Well, once upon a time, people would get the newspaper and they'd start at the front page and they'd read it from cover to cover. Now what tends to happen is people go to a news site, whether that's a media outlet that they prefer or perhaps it's just something that pops up in their social media feed. And what tends to happen is things such as the most clicked article rises to the top. And so instead of people reading about terrorist activity happening overseas or the internal political struggles of Middle Eastern dictatorships and so forth, people are far more likely to find out which celebrity is shagging which celebrity and so forth. And so all of this stuff rises up to the top and actually pushes the more intelligent discourse over. Reading quality journalism actually costs money, and I'm a big believer in seeing a diversity of opinion. So it doesn't mean only choosing your preferred media outlet. It means looking at all of them. But now that actually costs a lot of money. And so people might pick one or they might pick none, especially younger people who may not appreciate that, what Facebook tells them or what their Google or social media feed tells them is not accurate. So they tend to be fed like the proverbial chooks and just read what's put in front of them, which I think makes for a dumber electorate as well when we're looking at voting.
Do you think that this then contributes to fake news because there's just so many options out there that it's not always necessarily accurate and correct?
It absolutely does. I mean, again, with traditional media, you had editors, you had legal departments, you had 24 hours to file a story before it went to print. Now, the beginning of the rot started when you had a 24-hour, live sort of cable news service and stories just had to be pushed, and it was only later that they'd be issuing corrections as opposed to letting the story mature. Now what happens, there's such a rush to get it out there and that it's completely overwhelming. And that, of course, there's also a lot less cost involved in putting news out there. So you certainly see this in fake advertising on, say, Instagram. Once upon a time, it cost a fortune to put together an ad campaign, so you wouldn't jeopardise doing something that could see you sued or see the campaign scrapped. Now it's easy to put an ad on social media saying world's best product, and people are going to believe that because they haven't actually learned how much fakery there is online. And this is before you look at state government actors with the ability to focus certain stories and bring them to the top. Or alternatively, you look at big technology. I mean, people were always critical of Rupert Murdoch, but when you think about the real power that, for example, Google and other social media outlets have, it's remarkable. The New York Times columnist Bari Weiss in her resignation letter to the New York Times, reflected on the fact that Twitter had become the editor. And once upon a time, vox pops of a reporter holding a microphone to a stranger down at the shops was not taken too seriously. But now all of a sudden, anonymous quotes from people on social media can actually drive the news cycle and the entire political agenda for the day. And we end up with government by Twitter, which I don't think is healthy for democracy.
No, absolutely. You know, the voice of the people always drives the content, especially now during this pandemic. Just finally, I mean, do you think that online content promotes democracy?
Well, it's a double-edged sword because, I mean, on the one hand, the ability for any citizen to become a journalist and to publish content online, whether it's through video or social media, I think contributes to freedom. However, at the same time, I also think that, you know, big technology in Silicon Valley in many cases takes away people's rights by silencing them and seeing people who are deplatformed. And the irony is that some people, I mean, you know, I've had accounts banned from Twitter for fairly innocuous comments, get silenced. And yet when you look at other people, there are, you know, hard right extremists, there are Islamist terror groups, there are genocidal maniacs who are still posting because they just don't seem to have become in the crosshairs. I think this skews discussions. So the arbiters of freedom are perhaps not using that responsibility the way they should.
An interesting discussion and also a very well-needed announcement made by the ACCC. Daniel Lewkovitz, thank you so much for your time and analysis this afternoon.
Thanks, Danica.